I appreciate that. You know, as I considered whether I wanted to take on linking religious pluralism to this proposed idea I have called the pluralism of truth, I wondered if this was the time to offer a talk on the reshaping of truth. We are struggling through this pandemic. We are responding to an urgent call for revolutionary racial justice, and there is an undeniable assault on our practice of democracy. In the face of all that, is it really time, I thought, is it really time to suggest that folks look at truth in a new way? And then in November, I read a New York Times opinion piece by Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. And that's her byline, by the way, in the Times. Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. In that piece, she wrote, "A young woman named Breonna Taylor goes to sleep just as she's done every night before, but she doesn't live to see the morning because a police raid turns horribly wrong. George Floyd leaves a convenience store, not realizing he will take his last breath under the weight of someone's knee, and in his final moments, he calls out for his mom. Peaceful protests become violent. Health rapidly shifts to sickness. In places where there was once community, there is now division." And she continues, "On top of all this, it seems we no longer agree on what is true. We aren't just fighting over our opinions of facts. Fact, a fact. We are at odds over whether science is real. We are at odds over whether an election has been won or lost. We are at odds over the value of compromise." Well, I realized, well, what am I waiting for? If Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, is calling out that we no longer agree on what is true, then y'all must be ready to ponder a reshaping of truth. And I'll offer that today's UUs might not always be aware of the powerful reshaping of religious truth that we carry as part of our religiously liberal legacy. It's called religious pluralism. I want to quickly define religious pluralism for this talk. It's not simply the presence of religious diversity in a society. It also includes our social agreement that each person has the right to worship, believe, practice, and join in community with others according to their conscience. It is simultaneously true that individuals are free to abstain from these activities. In my sense of religious pluralism, individuals and communities protect each other's safety to worship, and those communities engage with each other, acknowledging areas of irreconcilable difference while focusing on areas of common ground. Religious scholar Diana Eck has an often cited quote that goes along with this. She writes, "Diversity is a fact, but pluralism is an achievement." This vision of how religiously diverse people can interact is not the dominant one in the world. Some people believe that fundamentalists cannot get along with anyone, or atheists do not have morals, or people of different religions will always fight. But if we want communities that look like religious pluralism, places with respect, support, and relationships and common action, we have to raise our voices in support and build this vision. In my experience, in this and other communities, is that UUs are the strongest voices in support of that vision. Again, I think that's because pluralism is a recognized element of our religious liberalism. For at least a couple of centuries, Unitarians and Universalists have grounded themselves in the tenets of religious liberalism. My modest proposal today is that if we can explore and understand a few of those tenets, we'll not only see more clearly the development of religious pluralism, but we may also reveal tools for helping us reshape our view of truth. I mean, now that Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, has said, we no longer agree on what truth is. There are three tenets I'll share. First, religious liberals recognize the profound experience of continuous revelation. This is typically seen as a statement that whatever we might see as divine or call the spirit of life or the universe or whatever we call it, the source is always in conversation with us, a continuing conversation with us. This tenet dispels the relevance of dogma. To rely on a static version of reality denies what Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams called a transforming reality that breaks through encrusted forms of life and thought to create new forms. Religious liberals put our faith in a creative reality that is recreative. Revelation is continuous. And theologian, UU theologian, Reverend Rebecca Parker says very succinctly, revelation comes to those who are radically hospitable to what they do not know. This first tenet directly affected and still affects our development of religious pluralism by landing us floating along in the river of ideas and experiences rather than standing planted in one spot on the banks of that river. The pluralism is that all relations between people ought ideally rest on mutual free consent and not on coercion. The simple reduction of this one is that we don't tell people they're going to hell if they don't believe or act in a certain way. The broader sense of this second tenet is our belief that the method of free inquiry, not coerced, free inquiry is, as Adams wrote, the only way consistent with both the dignity and the limitations of human nature, and is the method that reveals the maximum of discovery. Calling forth a method for maximum discovery leaves us preconditioned for religious pluralism. We're built to take in more rather than less. That's what we cherish in our fourth principle of Unitarian Universalism when we affirm the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. But we're built for maximum discovery. We're built for religious pluralism. The third tenet of religious liberalism affirms the moral obligation to direct our efforts toward the establishment of a just and loving community. We've talked about this before. This tenet lifts up the prophetic as an indispensable part of liberalism. We've been using this trichotomy of first seeing the world as it is, then envisioning the world as it should be, and finally working to make it so. That's our prophetic process. As I mentioned it earlier, the achievement of religious pluralism is made possible when individuals and communities protect each other's safety to worship, and those communities engage with each other, acknowledging deep areas of irreconcilable difference while focusing on areas of common ground. This third tenet delivers the relational imperatives that just, loving, and religiously plural communities require. Okay, so what about the pluralism of truth that I teased earlier? Here it is. I think those three tenets helped support religious pluralism. I think religious pluralism is really quite relatively a new way of shaping religious truth. I want us to consider using those same three tenets to help us reshape our sense of truth in this moment. Right now, again, as Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, revealed, our communities are polarized by our sense of truth. I figure most of us are chagrined that we are so polarized, and at the same time have resolved ourselves to hold fast to our truth, in effect, perpetuating the polarization. I want to be clear that nothing I'm about to say, nothing I'm about to offer speaks directly to the specific details of a truth any of you or any of us has constructed. I'm not suggesting a laissez-faire relationship with your truth, our truth. I don't want to spend 20 minutes with you talking to you today and leave you with some limp, ineffectual, quote unquote, liberal response. As the Reverend Dr. George Kimmick Beach wrote in his book, Transforming Liberalism, he said, liberalism must no longer be confused with lax, uncritical, or mere broad-minded attitudes, least of all in an age of rising tyrannies of the right and the left. He continued, the aim of religious awareness, religious faith, religious community, and religious life must be radical change. Things do not simply work themselves out. Human beings must push. Continuous revelation is a tool we can use to push against polarization. Remember Reverend Parker's quote, revelation comes to those who are radically hospitable to what they don't know. What if we carry our truth with us and at the same time engage with people who disagree in a radically hospitable fashion? Words, right? But in real life, let's look at this. A few months back, when we were sharing our truth at the County Commissioners Forum on the Second Amendment proposal, our truth. And then, as one of our COOF members did at that very commissioners meeting, she invited folks who disagree with her to talk with her after the meeting so they might better understand each other's thoughts. She was radically hospitable without forsaking her truth. Now, I'll be honest, and I know this is going to sound, confrontational in some ways, but I'll be honest, until we've all been radically hospitable 100 times over, I'm not ready to give credibility to the comment, oh, Paul, you just can't talk with some of those people. Once you're talking with people with whom you disagree, the second tenet comes into play. Relationships are not coercive. We must struggle within ourselves to meet people where they're at. Our coercive intents are quickly revealed if we can't authentically listen to the other's story. Our sense of the primacy of our truth has to be dislodged if our radical hospitality is to be converted into an ongoing relationship. We still carry our truths, and we also make room for other truths. We recognize our irreconcilable differences and we seek common ground. This is an unsatisfying effort if we don't develop some sense of a pluralism of truth. Our next tool, the third tenet, has a profoundly disruptive impact on the first two. And even though I got to it last, it has a foundational piece in place in what all that I'm offering. Remember, the third tenet states we have a moral obligation to direct our efforts toward the establishment of a just and loving community. This obligation demands that we first recognize the inhumanity of institutionalized oppression and marginalization of people in our community. Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color, the LGBTQIA communities, people with disabilities, and other folks have lived with oppression and marginalization. Liberating people from unjust oppression and marginalization is work we all must do. This work is our primary obligation, and I think it also has the potential to help us respond to our current polarization. I think many might identify it as a reason for one of the main reasons for our polarization. And for me, recognizing that it may be the cause of polarization and it may also lead us out of our polarization is likely an unsettling dichotomy. And I have to admit that I think most good ideas are unsettling. As individuals, we have work to do to reveal, unwind, and change our relationship to institutionalized oppression that we consciously or unconsciously support. This work on us and our institutions is where I want to tie back to the idea of pluralism of truth. As we do our individual work, we also have the obligation to share those truths with folks who disagree with us. When talking with people who disagree, we will start with long lists of apparently irreconcilable differences between our truths. In that moment, I find the words of Brazilian educator Paulo Freire deeply heartening when he referred to humanization as the permanent liberation of all people, and that permanent liberation is the vocation of all human beings. This is our work. All of us. We won't be effective in this liberating work if we remain polarized. This moment calls for nothing less than for us to reshape our sense of truth so we can chip away at our polarization so we can begin the permanent liberation of all people. I offer the pluralism of truth as the tool we can use to reshape our current sense of truth. Let me close with a very specific, what can we do, Paul, idea, because I hear that often after some of these broad-ranging talks. What can we do? That I hope each of us would extend radical hospitality to folks who disagree with us 100 times before we claimed it was futile. I also suggested that UUs are likely to act on a vision that moved us through our polarization. Well, there are roughly 150,000 adult members recognized by the UUA. Let's just say 50% of those folks were ready to try 100 times to engage authentically and openly with people who disagree with us. That's 75,000 people. If each of us simply invited folks with whom we disagree to share their truths, that could result in 7.5 million outreaches with the simple intent of reducing our polarization. I think this pluralism of truth idea works. Thank you.